Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed. We've got a fascinating and, frankly, long overdue topic on deck today. We're really getting into the recent FDA hearing on menopause, which happened back on July 17th. Our mission here is to, pull back the curtain on what actually happened at this really pivotal moment. We want to give you the critical context behind it, and maybe most importantly, unpack what it all means for women's health, especially when it comes to hormone therapy. So whether you're a woman navigating midlife yourself, maybe a healthcare provider, or, just someone who cares about women's health, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, and this wasn't just, any old hearing. It was actually prompted by a pretty powerful grassroots campaign called Let's Talk Menopause. They were
Yeah.
using the hashtag unboxing menopause, and their main target, a really big point of contention, that notorious black box warning that's currently on vaginal estrogen.
The black box warning. Okay, for listeners who might not know, can you quickly explain what that actually means? What does it signify?
Yeah, absolutely. So a black box warning, it's basically the strictest, most serious label the FDA can put on a product. It's really meant for drugs with significant, potentially life-threatening risk. You've nailed it. That's the core issue, really. To understand where we are now, you absolutely have to go back to July 2002. That's the moment when this current wave of misinformation around hormone therapy, it truly kicked off. The Women's Health Initiative, or WHI study, released its initial findings. And the reports, well, the way they were presented at the time, they basically suggested women on hormone therapy had increased risk for stroke, breast cancer, vascular disease. It just sent shockwaves, total panic.
The impact of that study was just profound, wasn't it? I mean, Dr. Barbara Levy, one of the experts at this recent FDA hearing, she still describes having PTSD from that time. Can you imagine? Patients literally throwing pills away, flushing them down the toilet, doctors just stopped prescribing. And what's even more alarming, maybe, is that medical schools drastically cut menopause training hours. You said from like 120 hours a week down to just 80.
Yeah, it was a significant drop.
So that didn't just reduce the hours, it basically created this lost generation of doctors who were less equipped to handle a really critical phase of women's lives. It set back research, patient care, by decades, really. It feels like one flawed interpretation didn't just erase progress, it kind of reinforced this cultural silence around menopause too, right?
Yeah.
Affecting everything from funding to just women feeling okay seeking help.
Exactly. And the crucial point, which really wasn't clear back then, is why that original WHI study was so misinterpreted, especially for perimenopausal women. You see, the study was mainly designed to look at cardiovascular disease, but in older patients. Women in their 60s, 70s, it wasn't designed for the younger sort of perimenopausal group who are usually dealing with hot flashes and those kinds of symptoms. Plus, there were, significant flaws in how the data was first assessed, especially around risk factors and the actual types of hormones they used. So the results really applied to a very specific older group, not representative of women in perimenopause considering hormones for symptoms.
Huh. It's like a classic case of, applying data to the wrong group and causing this widespread, long-lasting fear and setting back a whole field. But okay, thankfully, it sounds like efforts are underway now to correct this, to re-educate. You mentioned the Menopause Society getting that $5 million grant for education. That's fantastic.
It's a good step, yeah.
But all that history, that fear, it brings us back to today. And what the hearing revealed is maybe the most urgent and honestly kind of absurd issue, which is the shocking truth about vaginal estrogen and why that black box warning is just so flawed.
Right. Let's zero in on vaginal estrogen because this is where the science seems incredibly clear and the fear feels truly unfounded. The critical distinction here, the main thing to grasp, is that it is not systemically absorbed. What does that actually mean? Well, it means it doesn't really enter the bloodstream in any significant amount. This makes it completely different from other estrogen types, the creams, gels, patches, pills. Those do deliver estrogen systemically throughout the body.
Okay, wait, so zero systemic absorption.
Pretty much negligible. And the evidence presented at the hearing really backed this up. They showed data from like 400,000 women in the US, another 100,000 in the EU, and it demonstrated that vaginal estrogen doesn't even reach the endometrium, that's the uterine lining, let alone travel to the brain or the breasts or other parts of the body to cause those systemic issues like cancer or heart problems. You basically can't even measure it in the blood.
So just to be absolutely crystal clear then, even if a woman had, say, a history of breast cancer, this specific type of estrogen, because it's not getting into the bloodstream, would still be considered safe for tackling those localized symptoms.
That's precisely what the overwhelming evidence presented at the hearing supports, yes. This lack of systemic absorption is the key. And it really just highlights the Well, the absurdity of that black box warning. We heard some powerful, honestly heartbreaking stories at the hearing. Doctors telling stories about cancer patients who'd agreed to use vaginal estrogen. They understood the benefits for their quality of life. But then a family member sees the black box warning on the insert and throws the prescription out, literally saying things like, "It's not worth us having sex for you to possibly get cancer again." Just think about that fear overriding clear medical advice that could improve someone's life.
Wow. It's just,
Hmm.
it's hard to believe fear could be that potent. And that it stops women from getting something that could really help them. What are the proven benefits then for vaginal estrogen?
Oh, the benefits are significant, especially for what's called genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM. That's basically the medical term for that cluster of symptoms like recurrent UTIs, vaginal dryness, pain with sex, all linked to low estrogen in that specific area. New guidelines fully support using it. They emphasize its safety, and many physicians consider it safe. Some are even prescribing it quite broadly for women starting in their 40s. There was one particularly tragic story shared by Dr. Rachel Rubin. Her own mother ended up in the ICU multiple
Oh,
times
no.
because of recurrent UTIs. It just underscores the real world, sometimes life-saving impact this treatment can have, especially when non-medical people are trying to navigate these hurdles based on fear, not facts.
So the consensus from the medical community, at least those presenting at the hearing, was just overwhelmingly clear. Despite that scary, misleading black box warning, vaginal estrogen is safe and beneficial for a lot of women. Okay, given how clear that evidence seems, what do you think are the biggest, bureaucratic or regulatory hurdles the FDA faces in actually removing a warning like that? Is there any counterargument, maybe from a really cautious perspective, that still supports keeping it?
That's a really good question. And it sort of speaks to the inertia you often find in big regulatory bodies. Sometimes, once a warning is there, the process to get it removed is just incredibly difficult. It takes a lot of political will, financial push from drug manufacturers, even when the data is clearly pointing towards removal. The counter argument, from that super cautious angle, might just be to err on the side of maximum warning, even if it isn't scientifically justified, kind of a perceived duty to protect from any theoretical risk, however tiny. But it was pretty clear from the hearing that this approach is actually doing more harm than good right now.
Yeah, sounds like an ongoing battle, definitely. And speaking of treatments that are maybe underutilized or misunderstood, let's pivot slightly. What about testosterone for women? That came up too, right?
It did. While we often think of testosterone for men, it has potential benefits for women too, though it's definitely less studied. We heard about some patients, for instance, who were able to get off antidepressants once they started testosterone therapy, which really highlights its potential broader impact on well-being, not just libido.
That's really interesting. So even for something like testosterone, it sounds like doctors are kind of flying blind, having to improvise because the official pathways just aren't there for women. What's the biggest challenge you see clinicians facing when they try to microdose testosterone for women without clear guidelines?
Exactly. Flying blind is a good way to put it sometimes. The main hurdle is that, unlike in many other countries, there's currently no FDA-approved testosterone products specifically designed for women in the US, so doctors are forced to prescribe it off-label.
Hmm.
And that just adds layers of complexity, right? For the patient, for the provider, everything from figuring out the right dose to getting insurance to cover it. And something interesting highlighted at the hearing was the difference in FDA approval processes. Studies on male testosterone products often seem to get approval within, say, 6 months. But research into women's testosterone constantly faces demands for more data. Even when companies seem to meet the guidelines, it creates huge barriers.
Really does sound like an uneven playing field, definitely. And this brings us to Dr. Rhonda Wright, an orthopedic surgeon who shared some, frankly, startling statistics about bones, musculoskeletal health, and menopause.
She did, yeah, and her insights were really profound. She pointed out that 1 in 2 women over 50 will suffer an osteoporotic fracture, 1 in 2, yet fewer than 5% use hormone therapy to help prevent it. And she made this observation that just really sticks with you. We're putting rods in the hips of women for fractures that estrogen could have prevented. It just powerfully highlights how this pervasive fear of hormone therapy is leading to devastating but preventable outcomes for women down the line.
Wow, preventable fractures. That's heavy.
Oh.
Okay, so it's clear the hearing covered so much vital ground: vaginal estrogen, testosterone, bone health. But you mentioned one significant area was not really discussed in depth: progesterone.
Right. And it's such a vital piece of the puzzle, especially for any woman who still has her uterus. Because if you're taking estrogen, you absolutely need progesterone alongside it to protect against uterine or endometrial cancer. But here's where it gets really complex and frankly still lacks a lot of clarity for both doctors and patients. It's this critical distinction between progestin, which is often a synthetic man-made hormone, and progesterone, which is bioidentical, meaning it's chemically the same as the hormone your body makes naturally. The source material we looked at highlighted that a lot of the breast cancer risk flagged in the original WHI study was actually linked to the synthetic progestins, not necessarily the bioidentical progesterone. But that crucial difference, it's still widely debated and honestly poorly understood by many.
Huh. So if the original studies didn't clearly separate those two types, it really muddies the water for women trying to figure out their actual risks today. And beyond just that distinction, what about things like the right doses? Or how hormonal IUDs which have progestin fit into this, especially for women in perimenopause when their ovulation might be all over the place?
Exactly. Those are the critical unanswered questions. What's the right dose? 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, 300 milligrams. How do hormonal IUDs or even birth control pills with progestin factor in? Especially during perimenopause when, like you said, ovulation is inconsistent, so natural progesterone levels are fluctuating wildly anyway. It leaves clinicians and patients trying to navigate this really complex landscape, often without clear, actionable guidelines. It's definitely a crucial area that still needs its own deep dive, its own unboxing, you could say.
Absolutely. And this really brings us to that bigger idea, the full picture of women's health and why the healthcare system sometimes just falls short. It's not about pointing fingers at one group, right? It's about understanding how all these different parts are interconnected and how a breakdown in one area can just cascade through the whole system.
Yeah, exactly. For the healthcare system to actually work well for women's health, several key components really need to be firing on all cylinders, working together. You need researchers who are actually studying how diseases show up in women. Sometimes they're different, sometimes women get them more often, and how life stages, like menopause, change those health risks. Clinical trials have to include women right from the start, not just tack them on later. Regulatory bodies, like the FDA, they need to really understand these conditions deeply to approve the right drugs from the right perspective. Then you have payers, insurance companies, they have to reimburse treatments that actually work. And that means having the proper ICD codes, those standardized medical billing codes, so they can actually identify and pay for women's specific health conditions. Without those codes, it's like trying to bill for something that doesn't officially exist in their system.
Right. So even if a treatment exists, if there's no way to bill for it,
Exactly. It creates a barrier. Then, clinicians need proper training, the right tools, so they're not just improvising. Patients need to feel empowered to speak up, to advocate for themselves. And finally, the media, we need to go beyond just the scary headlines and explain the full, complex picture. Think about it. A woman has severe vaginal dryness, her doctor knows vaginal estrogen works, but maybe insurance denies it because there isn't a clear billing code for that specific symptom. Or maybe her family talks her out of it because they saw that outdated warning label. That's how these interconnected failures play out in real life.
that's such a clear way to put it, that formula for making the system actually work for women. So, okay, boiling it all down, what does this all mean for you, our listener? We've covered a lot today, haven't we? That long shadow of misinformation from 2002, the surprising safety and real benefits of vaginal estrogen despite that misleading warning, the uphill battle for women's testosterone access, and that bigger picture of systemic issues holding back women's healthcare.
And understanding how all these pieces connect, these interdependencies, it's really crucial. It helps you ask better questions, challenge maybe outdated ideas you hear, and advocate more effectively for yourself, for the women in your life, for better care and clear information. This whole unboxing idea isn't just about the FDA changing a label. It's really about unveiling the full, complex story for everyone.
So here's a thought to leave you with. If this FDA hearing was maybe one long overdue step in finally unboxing menopause,
Yeah.
what else in women's health is still sitting there, waiting in its box, waiting for its moment in the spotlight? And what role can you play, maybe, in helping to bring it forward? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into some really crucial health information.